All right, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. We are here for Leo Rivera's mock draft. I am Liam Howard, and Leo joining us today for his mock draft. My mock draft is also going to be posted. This is the first round. As we did in my video, it is going to be us picking based on what we would do as the GM for any given team, not necessarily where we think guys are going to go. Just creates a little more, some interesting takes here. We can kind of talk about some guys we've fallen in love with on tape. And so, Leo, without further ado, if you want to get us underway.
Let's hop right into this one and be quick, Liam, with the Raiders. I think they go Fernando Mendoza just like you do. I think that's pretty cut, clear, and dry. And if I was, in the Raiders organization, you have to take a swing at the quarterback for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Just the most complete quarterback in this class. Fernando Mendoza, the unanimous number one pick. And there have been some rumblings of some people trying to say Ty Simpson is a better quarterback, but I think that the NFL scouts and the fans alike know that is not the case. Fernando Mendoza should be the first guy.
Yeah, definitely. Then moving on down to the Jets here, in what might be an interesting decision where I'm immediately going to be different from you, Liam. I'm actually going to go ahead and take David Bailey here as number 2 overall. Again, I kind of commented earlier on, liking both of these prospects, but just personally, I'm taking Bailey.
Yeah, I kind of wondered about that when you mentioned him sliding down a little ways. I think that's a great pick. I honestly think with the Jets that they need to go defense here. They need to get themselves a pass rusher, and if David Bailey is that fit, I don't think anyone's going to complain. I think their fans should be just as happy about that as they would be if they got Arvell Reese. I think that David Bailey is a perfect fit there, and yeah, just a mauler. This is a double-digit sack guy on a defense that was incredible at getting to the quarterback all season long. He played against some great offensive lines in the Big 12. He put a lot on film, and I mean, this is a dude who shows up no gloves, no arm sleeves, nothing like that. He's wearing a ripped up jersey and just looking like he's there to beat people up, and that is exactly what you want in a Jets pass rush.
For sure. And then going on the flip side, I think then if you're the Arizona Cardinals and you see that, Arvell Reese is still on the board, I think you got to continue to go BPA, and I think there's no way you could pass up on him here. And I got, Cardinals going ahead and taking Arvell Reese.
All right, that's interesting. Yeah, I have the Cardinals going offensive line, but I mean, their defense needs it bad too. Their defense needs some assurance, especially in that pass rush. You can't really go wrong as well if you're the Cardinals. I think, like you said, that's another team that this is another team like the Jets that has so many different holes that you can't really go wrong. And I think Arvell Reese, just another freak of nature, a guy who can get past offensive lines quicker than they have time to really recognize it. His moves at the point of contact are incredible, and just some great pass rush moves. He's going to get to the quarterback a lot, and he's going to be a key piece of that Cardinals defense.
Definitely. Moving on again down the list, we talked about Cam Ward and the Titans needing protection. I agree with you on that one, Liam, but that means Francis Magua is still available on the board. So I think, the big man out of Miami, he's got to go in and protect Cam Ward, get him on the Titans.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick there. I think if he's available at this point, because I have them taking Spencer Fano at that point.
Yeah.
But Francis Mauigoa, if he's available, you got to take him if you're the Titans. They got to take the best offensive line that's still on the board. If the Cardinals don't go offensive line, then Francis Mauigoa is the perfect answer for them, and he's going to keep Cam Ward upright for the first time in his NFL career.
All right, moving on down to the Giants and Jackson Dart. I mean, they're going to have to go out and potentially get some weapons for him there. But I think first and foremost, like you said, Liam, you have to protect your young quarterback. You can't be letting him out there getting hit. You can't be having him out there fighting for his life. And especially with the New York Giants, who've had, a bottom tier offensive line for a lot of years now, they haven't really ever been able to be consistent there at that position. I think you have to go out to Georgia and the SEC and get a tackle on Monroe Freeling.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick right there. Monroe Freeling is a heck of a player, and he's a guy who can move around in the offensive line. If they need to play him at guard, they can. If they, I think they should play him at tackle. They haven't found an answer there. Evan Neal certainly was not the answer. I actually saw someone writing something about how Evan Neal only signing back on like a 1-year contract was the worst signing of the entire offseason. So I think the Giants fans base are certainly done with Evan Neal. I think I realistically think that front office should be as well. I think that Monroe Freeling is going to make up sort of for the lost time that they've had trying to get him to work out at that tackle position. He's going to step right up, and I think he's going to be ready right away. Great pick there.
Yeah, and then going down onto the Cleveland Browns, you had them taking a wide receiver and Mekhi Lemon. I think they need to go out and get a playmaker too. But I think personally they go out and get Carnell Tate. I think, they're really going to be a team that kind of falls in love with his measurables in the frame and what he's able to provide. And again, Ohio State being, wide receiver why not go ahead and pick him there?
Yeah, another guy I think that you really could swap him with Mekhi Lemon. I think that they're very, very close in terms of what they put on the field. And Carnell Tate, just a guy who, like I mentioned in my mock draft, is a great red zone threat. I think that having that type of option for the Cleveland Browns would be huge. They've got Jerry Jeudy, who has been struggling with drops in his time in Cleveland. He led the league in drops last season, and that's kind of what made them realize, okay, this can't be our wide receiver of the future. And so I think getting a guy like Carnell Tate, who doesn't drop much of anything, I think that's the perfect flip there and a great pick.
Yeah, moving on down to the Washington Commanders. This one I was really torn on because, like you, I think, Jeremiah Love just really would be a really good fit. I think, he's going to be a guy who is going to add explosion to whatever offense he ends up in. But I just see the Commanders fall in love with Ruben Bain, and you can't let him pass up. I'm going to be real. I think when you talk about the value of a premier edge rusher versus the value of a running back in that Commanders room, who again is playing such premier offenses in that NFC East, go out and get Ruben Bain. He's going to come out and anchor that edge and really wreak havoc to Jalen Hurts and Dak Prescott.
Yeah, that's a heck of a pick there. And I think that, like you said, Jeremiah Love's a great player, but Ruben Bain is as well. And having the option to have Ruben Bain as the pass rusher for the Commanders, that's something that they certainly have to consider, even if that backfield hasn't been what they've hoped. I think he's going to do great in Washington if that's what they end up going with.
For sure. Moving on down now the list, you have the Saints, and this one I was kind of torn on because I felt there was, again, a lot of prospects here, especially with the amount of holes that they have on their team, Liam. But again, I'm going to go kind of a bold take. I'm going to put Akeem Mesidor here at this one, going back to back with the Miami Edges here. Although he's old, I think he just has too much experience and too much of that it factor and consistency of he's got it figured out. He's played college football for so damn long that he needs to have it figured out. And I think that's going to be an advantage for the Saints, who again need to be able to be explosive and need to have a pass rusher.
Yeah, absolutely. Those 12.5 sacks this season were evidence of that, and he was just as much of a problem as Ruben Bain was for opposing offenses, and maybe more of a problem. I think his age does a lot to tank his draft stock. If he was the same age as Ruben Bain, at this point, I think that he would be maybe above him. So Akeem Mesidor, a great pick there, and I will say, just interesting to see Jeremiah Love falling this far.
Well, that's exactly who's going to be taken here at the next pick. I think, unfortunately, if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you talk about needing a true running back. Andy Reid's not letting Jeremiah Love go past him. If in this bizarre world somehow he is still available, I think you got to make sure you go out and pick him up, and he's going to add instant explosion to that Kansas City running game. And another tool for Andy Reid to kind of play with. It gives, pressure off of Patrick Mahomes, I feel, and I think it's going to be good for them.
And as a Broncos fan as well, that scares me because they just brought in Kenneth Walker. You pair him up with Jeremiah Love in that backfield, that would be a scary combination. Also, it would put all the pressure on Mahomes to be the playmaker for that offense, which he is a guy that you could do that with, but he had the injury this past season, and he may or may not be 100%. By week 1 of this year, he might have to miss some more time. So that's not something you want to put on him right away. I think that having another running back there would be scary, and that Chiefs offense would be firing on all cylinders once again.
Yeah, again, and kind of, just with that two-back mindset, I think the Chiefs are in need of a direction change. They've been so pass-heavy, again, relying on Mahomes all these years. But yeah, that injury is a big part of it. I think they look at, seeing Jeremiah Love fall there, and they really just can't pass up on him. So I think, again, pairing him with Kenneth Walker would be fired. Moving on down the list now. Good old Cincinnati Bengals. Man, this team, again, is always distraught. They need help as much as they can get. And when you talk about help on the offensive line, you have to go Vega Ioane. you have to go. You need him inside there as a mauler. Protect Joe Burrow. Keep him safe. There's been so much complaints about the Cincinnati Bengals and their lack of offensive line over the years. You need Joe Burrow healthy. You want no excuses out of him there that he's getting the support. Go out and get good old Vega.
Yeah, that's a interesting pick because I obviously had Caleb Downs going there, but I think that even in the back of my mind, I know that as great a pick as Caleb Downs is, there would still be some outcry from Bengals fans of why are we still not protecting Joe Burrow? It's something that happens every draft. You get to that point and there's just a defensive player on the board who's too good to pass up or a player at a different position and they go a different route. I think that getting an offensive lineman and a guy that you have fallen in love with at this point in the draft process, in the pre-draft process, I think that would be huge for them. And like you said, a mauler, he's going to move the pocket around. So even if they don't entirely rebuild that offensive line in this draft, he can at least be an anchoring point that Joe Burrow can work behind and have some more time to throw.
Yeah, now moving on to the Dolphins, we've kind of talked about them and their wide receiver troubles as of late. And I think when you look at the board, they're going to go out and I think they're going to be the team that kind of falls in love with Jordan Tyson and wants to bring him in to go ahead and be a Miami Dolphin with his frame, just the amount of targets. They want a true wide receiver one who can take on that load. I know there's the injury concern, but I like him being a good fit there in Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the Dolphins can't really go wrong with any of these top three receivers. I think as long as they're leaving with a receiver, their fans will be happy. Jordan Tyson, a guy who is an incredible playmaker, and that season that they were on that run to the college football playoff, even though he was injured for the college football playoff, he was such a huge part of that offense throughout the regular season. That can't be discredited. And then even this season, even when there was quarterback issues and they were cycling through guys, he was still a consistent piece of that offense when he was on the field. I think, yeah, that injury concern is certainly there, but the Dolphins really cannot go wrong at this point.
Moving on down, Liam, to the Dallas Cowboys, a team, again, that you had Jacob Rodriguez going to, which I was a big fan of. I think he's just an absolute monster. But in my draft, I do have him taking the linebacker here early, but I have them going with Sonny Styles. I think that Jerry Jones is one of those guys who falls in love with frame. He falls in love with physique, and he's going to look at it and see the potential of having Sonny in their defense, and he's going to want to take him.
Yeah, that's another great linebacker. I think you're right. You know, if they do end up going with a different linebacker here, they probably wouldn't go with Rodriguez with their second pick of the first round. But I think that a guy like Sonny Styles is such a freak of nature, and his physicals that he displayed at the combine are enough to be okay with that, and to make him your linebacker of the future as you sort of rebuild that room. I think they can get a lot out of him. They have to develop him properly, that's for sure. They'll have to pay a lot of attention to that. But getting a defensive piece there on a defense that's struggled and been sort of diminished as the years have gone on, I think that's a great pick.
Yeah, then going down to, the Los Angeles Rams, this one was kind of one I was a little bit torn on, because I think that the Rams do have a lot of need outside of the position I'm going to have them draft. But I think when you talk about Sean McVay, again, just like I just said with good old Andy Reid, these offensive play callers, when they see weapons come available, they're not going to let them go. And I think Mekhi Lemon being here is just that kind of player that will pair well with Puka and kind of rebrand that wide receiver room and give Matthew Stafford one last chance to really go out and see if he can't get another ring.
That's an interesting pickup. I haven't seen a lot of people mocking him there, but that would be I love the fit, to be honest. And I think that, obviously Puka Nacua just has been having some interesting situations go on in the offseason, may or may not be facing some sort of suspension when the season comes around.
Jeez.
So that's something that they've got to think about. And I think that having a guy, because you got Devontae Adams in that receiver room still, but he's certainly on the decline. He has not been the same Devontae Adams that he was years ago. And so you've got a guy in Mekhi Lemon who now, with a couple other guys, he's gonna not have to be lining up against the cornerback one of every defense, and so I think he'll get open a lot. You can move him into the slot, and he's not a receiver type that they have at this point, so I think it's a good fit
for sure. Then moving on to the Ravens, I feel like this is a team that needs help in their secondary big time. They've been very prominent on the offensive end of the ball, and that aspect, and I think they did a good job again keeping that team built up. I think they're built up to have another good run this year with a healthy Lamar Jackson, preferably. But I think Mansour Delane there out of LSU, who's still available on the board, becomes a great pickup for them and the guy they got to snag.
Yeah, I think Mansour Delane, like I said in my mock draft, the most consistent corner. You know what you're getting with him, and I think that the Ravens could definitely use another corner. I think that Kyle Hamilton's done a great job in that safety room of making that a unit that the Ravens can sort of hang their hat on. But the cornerbacks have been a shaky situation for them over the last couple of years. And I think that a guy like Mansour Delane certainly shores up that position. And in a division where there's a lot of great receiver talent, especially when you're playing a team like the Bengals, you're going to need a guy like Mansour Delane to lock down the likes of T. Higgins.
Definitely, and that's one thing I'm glad you brought up, because that's going to be something that the Ravens are going to have to be worried about, especially, looking long-term towards playoffs. You need a shutdown corner. You need someone who's going to be able to be reliable there. But now looking at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here, Liam, I know you had them taking Sonny Styles here at this pick, and they definitely do need to fill in that linebacker slot for sure, but I just don't see how they could pass up on Caleb Downs. If you're looking at this board, the fact that he's dropped this far already is kind of insane, but I think that the Bucs are a team that can take his need on defense. He's instantly going to come in, be a leader, be that vocal presence that, maybe you lost in Levante David, and I just like his fit there.
Yeah, what a pick that would be for the Buccaneers, getting him at 15, an unbelievably talented player who you can use anywhere in the defense. And even if you need to move him down, and like we said, we mentioned his tackling ability in my first round. I think that he can play sort of a strong safety type of role if that's what you're looking for, but they can move him to the free safety if they want to as well. Good in zone coverage, a good willing tackler as well. I think that's a great pick there for the Buccaneers if he's available.
Now, Liam, before I tell you who I have the Jets drafting, I will say I do think that they could potentially get Ty Simpson. I just think it's going to be second round. I don't know if he goes first. So that's why I think if you're planning ahead on that, you have to go ahead and take Spencer Fano here. You got to take him from Utah. Proven talent. I think he's a great addition to help out the Jets offensive line.
Yeah, he was another guy. I was wondering when you were going to have him going at this point in the draft. But yeah, 16th overall, you've got a guy like Fano on the board still. I mean, that's hard to pass up. Even if Ty Simpson's there and the Jets are needing a quarterback, like you said, if you feel like, if you're the Jets and you feel like, okay, we can get him in the second round, because these teams communicate a lot more than we are aware of. And they sort of know what they're looking for in the draft more than we do and more than we will really ever know. That's why a lot of things tend to come out on draft day, like, oh, this team's looking at taking this. Like, I remember when the draft started and they were like, oh, the Falcons might be taking Michael Penix tonight. That was like the weirdest thing I'd ever heard, and then they actually did it. It's things like that where, there's things that we might not be seeing, but they might be looking at it. They think they can get him in the second round. I think that's an incredible pick. You shore up that offensive line and you give him some security back there. That would be great for the future of the Jets.
Certainly. And then you go on down to a team in the Lions, who I'm also kind of interested in who you would kind of put up over there and kind of plug and play with all their, various holes and whatnot over there. But this is where I see them picking up your boy, Avion Terrell from Clemson here, Liam.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick there. I had them taking Jermod McCoy, but I also had Avion Terrell off the board already. I think if Avion Terrell is on the board at this point near the Lions, you gotta get him. The main concern I had with Jermod McCoy going into this Lions defense was his health. Avion Terrell is the polar opposite. While he hasn't necessarily had the consistency of play when he's been on the field, he has not dealt with the same types of injuries that you've seen from Jermod McCoy. He's really been a consistent guy for Clemson. He's been consistently on the field, not someone they've had to worry about missing a game, and I think that is something that the Lions would value greatly. I wouldn't be shocked if they traded up to get him, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad call at all. I think there are definitely a potential for a lot of trades. I know this is a no trade mock, but I think there's going to be a lot of movement, particularly around that kind of mid-range area when teams start to see the board fall and which potential players are available, at that slot. But moving on down to the Minnesota Vikings, they have a really young quarterback there in 9 that they're hoping can potentially develop, but they also brought in some competition there, Liam, and that's going to be an interesting fit to see what happens there. But I think regardless of who the quarterback is, Kenyon Sadiq can come in and be an instant help, an absolute weapon for Coach Mike Macdonald, who knows what he's doing in his offensive scheme. I think if you get him a weapon like Sadiq to come in, pair well with Justin Jefferson just on the inside, create, less pressure on Jettas out wide, you could relieve the pressure on the middle. I think he'd be a great fit there.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting pick. I think that that would be great for whoever is the quarterback there. You get a little bit of extra blocking help as well with him. One thing that I'd be interested, they've of course got TJ Hawkinson there. I'd be interested to see, how would you foresee them, I guess, using both of those guys and making sure they do so effectively?
Yeah, I think, with TJ Hawkinson, he's definitely going to be one of those players that you're kind of going to be looking at give it up potentially in the next couple of years within the breakout of Sadiq, and I kind of see him as being more of almost that mentor role and kind of getting him prepared for the league. But I think you're going to use Sadiq more as a receiver anyway. I think you could use Hawkinson, bigger frame, more as a blocking, but go 12 personnel. There's no reason why you can't have two tight ends on the field at the same time, especially knowing the receiving ability that Sadiq has.
I love it. I think that'd be great. And if they can work him in there effectively, man, that'd be a scary offense once again for the Vikings.
100%. And the Vikings are a team that, have always displayed great offense, at least of late. And that's kind of been what they've known for. So why not? Be a good fit over there. Now we're talking about the Carolina Panthers and a team that also can use some more help out there. And you talk about a young quarterback again in Bryce Young, who's been kind of trying to do it all. He's been gotten beat up a little bit, and I think why let him get beat up when you can grab a guy like Caden Proctor, who's available on this board at Alabama.
Yeah, that's great. And I mentioned in my first round mock that Bryce Young has been getting beat up back there for a few years now, and I think Caden Proctor definitely shares that up. I think that while another target would be great for Bryce Young, you got Tedero McMillan, who's a proven receiver now, someone that he can finally rely on to feed the ball to. I think if you're keeping him upright more, I think that's certainly something that you should do if you're the Panthers.
I mean, certainly, especially, looking forward to long term. I think he could be a guy that develops into a pro that's around for a long time. But now you're back up with the Cowboys, Liam Howard, and they're going to have to do something to shore up that defense for sure. They got a lot of different holes, and I think that's where they kind of fall in love with Tennessee's Jermod McCoy, who really kind of had, again, the injury that derailed his season, but looking at the potential, Cowboys are going to do their research. I think that's a guy that, they'll be able to fall in love with and have, problem with betting on his potential.
Yeah, for sure. I think that secondary is something they certainly need to focus on. It's interesting. We kind of flipped. I had them going cornerback first, linebacker second. You had them going linebacker first, cornerback second. I think it's clear what they need to address in this first round. It really just does come down to the order that they do it. I think that this is a great move here. Sonny Styles already showed up in that defense. That would be great for them at linebacker. And then you've got Jermod McCoy, who you got to figure out. You got to make sure he's going to be available for you, be on the field. But I think if he can, the ceiling is so dang high there. And if you've got the opportunity as the Cowboys to make it out of this first round with guys that have the ceilings of, top 10 picks, really, that are just kind of being held back by a few little things, Styles that didn't quite have the on-field production, but the physicals are all there, and Jermod, just the injury issue. I think that those two guys have incredibly high ceilings, and they could be the core of a Cowboys defense at their best.
For sure. Now you're talking about the Steelers and obviously trying to bring Aaron Rodgers back there, Liam. And one thing I agree with you with, again, they need a wide receiver. And I'm looking at this board and I see Denzel Boston still available. Big receiver out of Washington, large target. I think he's going to be a number one that they can potentially fall in love with.
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm not very high on Denzel Boston compared to a lot of people, but I understand with the physicals. I mean, this guy has all the physicals you could want out of a wide receiver, and I think that if this is a guy that they could work into the scheme properly, and also alongside DK Metcalf. I think if you've got DK Metcalf taking a bit of that attention, you can work Boston in more effectively than if he was trying to be asked to be a wide receiver one on an NFL team somewhere. But I think that would be a good fit. I think that he can impact that offense well and give Aaron Rodgers a little bit more youth to get that ball to frequently in the offense and make some plays after the catch.
Yeah, and you talk about playing with a veteran guy like Aaron Rodgers, I think that's great for his development. He's able to, again, take a back seat to DK Metcalf not having to be that number one off rip and kind of develop, and I think that's a good role for him there. Moving on now, though, Liam, to the San Diego Superchargers. There is kind of a lot of directions, again, I feel they could go here. I'm not exactly sure with, players who have been standing out to them, but I think about where they've lacked the last couple seasons. On the interior, they've really gotten beat up, and they need Caden McDonald from Ohio State to come in and fill in at that D tackle position.
Now that would be a heck of a pick, and I mentioned them going with Peter Woods, and I said though that he sort of the lack of production this season knocked him down the board a little bit in terms of being that standalone DT1. But I think that's a great pick. Bringing in a guy like McDonald is basically it's addressing the same need, and it really just comes down to a preference of opinion. If they're wanting a guy who they can guarantee is going to be consistent, they can guarantee is going to produce for them, I think McDonald is the way to go. I think Woods maybe has a little higher of a ceiling, but McDonald no slouch either.
Again, yeah, you talked about that, Liam, and I think, again, there's so many of these prospects like that where it's genuinely, there's no wrong opinion necessarily on who you would take first. It kind of just goes down to the preference of your scheme or the style or maybe how you see the player being used. But speaking of players being used, I think the Eagles are going to be on the board with a hole at safety that you mentioned, and I think they're able to get that filled up with Emmanuel McNeil-Warren out of Toledo.
Oh yeah, I talked a lot about him in my first round. I think that is a great pick there. I only had AJ Halsey above him a little bit, mostly just because of that SEC experience, but McNeil-Warren, I mean, my goodness, what a player. This guy can hit like crazy. He's going to be he's going to be a player that the Eagles can use, and they've already established that physical brand of football in Philly. I think that's something he fits right into. And of course, he's got he's got a former Toledo Rocket in Quinion Mitchell in that secondary alongside him. I think that would be an incredible duo to watch there.
Yeah, certainly. Moving on down to the Cleveland Browns. Again, this is a team that's going to need to figure out something because they've been just so poor for so long. But I think when you look at the holes that they have, it's not much. It's really not that much. I think they need help in the secondary specifically, Liam. And so that's kind of where I was looking at during this kind of process of who I was going to fit in on, Cleveland's board. And as it was kind of thinning out, I kind of really didn't see anyone other than Colton Hood kind of being the guy who could potentially come in and be selected here for the Cleveland Browns. I think, they're going to be looking for potentially someone else higher, but just based upon the board and the way it falls, I think they're going to have no problem taking Colton Hood here.
Yeah, I think once again, this is one of those picks where it's like there is no wrong opinion. I think there's a lot of cornerbacks that could go around the same spot. I had Brandon Cease going here out of South Carolina, but I could totally see Colton Hood at this same spot. I think Colton Hood certainly had more production in terms of his tackling and, where they moved him around. They used him in so many areas of the field at Tennessee, especially with Jermon McCoy being gone. So I think that he's shown that he can perform in a lot of different roles, something the Browns need, and I think he would perform incredibly well, something that they can build that secondary around.
Yeah, certainly a good cornerstone piece. And again, the Browns just need to get people. They just need to get bodies and need to figure out who's going to be able to come in and provide consistency there. But moving on now to the Bears, the Chicago Bears. I think that they need help on defense. Again, we talked about just being more consistent and being aggressive. And why not take the chance on Cassius Howell? Why not, Liam? He's shown that body of work. He's shown he's proven. And at that edge position, I think he would fit nice in Chicago.
Yeah, Cassius Howell, man, I love him. He's a great player. He's a scary player. He's just a ripper. He's a guy who is going to tear up the offensive line. And especially when he's matched up on the interior, when they've moved him into the interior and he's had to match up with some guards, that has been a matchup nightmare for opposing teams in the SEC, might I add. So I think that's a great player with, obviously a lot of people have been looking at, he doesn't have quite the wingspan that you might want for an NFL edge rusher. And I personally just think, his the moves he still has at the point of contact, his spin moves, his finesse moves, they get the job done. And I think that it clearly showed. He got to the quarterback 11 and a half times this season, and that's going to translate perfectly to the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, now you talk about the Bills, who's a team that doesn't necessarily have glaring weaknesses, Liam. I think they've been just very solid guys. They just don't have superstars. A lot of good players though, and I think on the defensive tackle spot, Peter Woods is available. He's going to come in. He's going to be a consistent force and just a nice interior piece for them.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that Bills pass rush is something that they are looking to shore up a little bit more. That was seen in that was seen in a few. That's been seen honestly over the last couple of years in a few of their bigger matchups, trying to get to some of the best quarterbacks in the league, the likes of Lamar Jackson and the likes of Patrick Mahomes, the likes of Bo Nix.
Yes.
In the playoffs in recent years, and I think they've struggled to do so. And I think that a guy like Peter Woods, if he can actually take that step forward and develop into the ceiling that he possesses, that would be an incredible fit for the Buffalo Bills.
For certainly going down the list now to the San Francisco 49ers. Again, I agreed with you big time on this one that they could get offensive line and they could find some maulers here. And I think Caleb Lomo, the other offensive tackle out of Utah, who, like you mentioned in the previous video, he's got that potential to play inside. He's really got the versatility to move into guard if you need. I think there in San Francisco, there's going to be plenty of opportunity for him to plug and play wherever he can help, and he'll be a great fit for Kyle Shanahan's offense.
Yeah, one thing I love about that fit, too, is you can move him inside for the first couple of years. Trent Williams is getting up there in age, even though he hasn't lost a step, but I mean, he's not going to play forever, and that's something that you're going to need to look to replace eventually. You have him move down into that guard position for maybe the first couple of seasons, however long it takes until Trent Williams is ready to call it quits. You give him some mentorship, and then you move him to be that cornerstone tackle. I think that is that's the perfect golden path to success for him almost.
Certainly, and I think, in being in a good organization as well always helps. Speaking of organizations that need help, the Houston Texans then, pop up next on the board, and I think they're at a position where they're kind of just looking to get, another cornerback, I would say, and a playmaker that can come out and help them, and that's where I think Brandon Cease is going to be a nice pickup for them here.
Yeah, I think that'd be great, especially if they're at this point and those major offensive linemen that we have talked about in both our mocks are gone. I think that's a great way to go. You get a guy, as I mentioned, whose recovery ability is incredible, and especially when you're putting him in a defense with a guy like Derek Stingley, who you can still have on the wide receiver ones at least for now, and then you can develop Brandon Cease a little bit more. He's a bit of a project. You develop him a little bit more. Maybe he's winning in press man a little bit more off the press, and he's not having to use his recovery as much as he might have to somewhere else. I think that could be a great fit, and his development would definitely show it.
Certainly. Now, Liam, this is where I really hope this doesn't happen, but I'm just saying, if you're drafted and the board falls out like this, Jacob Rodriguez as a Chief would just be an absolute menace at that Mike spot. And I think if you have him and you add Jeremiah Love with Kenneth Walker, and just that's going to be a monster team.
Man, what a first round that would be for the Chiefs. And you pair him with a guy like Nick Bolton, who has emerged as a great linebacker there for the Chiefs. That would be scary times. You get past that second. I mean, there's some great running backs in the AFC, but they get past that second level. That is not going to be a fun time, and they're not going to get much further because Nick Bolton and Jacob Rodriguez working alongside each other, that can really be something. And they're looking to move towards a new look defense with a lot of guys aging, a lot of guys on the way out. That would be a perfect place to start. Two incredible linebackers that can shore that up, and you can build around.
Yeah, and that's kind of really what, I think I was looking at is just fundamentals, best player available. I think too many times teams kind of draft based upon need and not necessarily who's going to be the best player. It's like, sure, you might have a guy in that spot, but if you can upgrade to an all-pro type player at that position, why not? Just take best player available. That's what the later rounds are for, with, getting needs and guys you can develop and put into your position. But that's kind of a whole other different rant. I'll kind of get off on that tangent. Moving on down to the Dolphins, who traded up with the Denver Broncos, and they are going out. They're going to need some more help, and I think that's where they see Zion Young, the edge out of Missouri, could come in and be a good pick for them.
Oh, wow, this is interesting. I didn't have Zion Young for a little while, actually, after this, but I mean, he is a great pass rusher, and he showed that at Missouri. He was another one of those guys who didn't really have a guy, across from him on that defensive line. It was really just him, and he was matching up with the best tackle each time. The offensive lines are scheming around him, and he was still able to find success success. I think that would be a very good fit in a Dolphins defense that has a lot of needs.
Certainly. And then moving on down to the Super Bowl losers, New England Patriots, coming out of the AFC there. Again, I agree with you. They need a wide receiver. They got to have someone for Drake May to throw to. And I think, going down the prospect list of receivers is kind of, again, iffy beyond those top 3 guys, I would say, on who can actually come out. But I really do like Casey Conception and what he was able to do at Texas A&M last season and just his body of work and consistency.
Yeah, he's a very intriguing prospect to me, and I think that his ability his speed is definitely undeniable. His route running is incredible. The only thing to me is he kind of screams Jerry Jeudy. He had some drops. He had some drop issues at Texas A&M, and he had the NC State a little bit too. That's something he struggled with. And for the Patriots, looking for a guy to be that consistent wide receiver, one who you could feed the ball to. I wouldn't really want a guy who has those same issues, but but you look at his positive traits, and my goodness, they jump off the page. His route running is incredible. Yeah. He will win with his routes. He will get open. That's no question. And I think that if that's what you're looking for the Patriots, what a fit.
All right, Liam, and to close out with pick 32, to close out the first round of our mock draft, I think the Seattle Super Bowl winning Seahawks should go out and select Anthony Hill Jr., the linebacker out of Texas.
Ooh, Anthony Hill. That's another guy that you're definitely higher on than me. I don't have him going for a little ways, but I like the fit, though. I think that Seattle defense was great this season. You add in another capable linebacker who, I think they could develop. I think he'll be a little bit more of a project. They might need to develop him over time, but when you got a defense that talented, you got to pay up at some point, and that's going to come down the line. They're going to lose a lot of players, and I think that having some guys ready to go who are still on their rookie contracts, and I think a guy like Anthony Hill could be that guy for them. And if they develop him right, he could turn into a cornerstone of that linebacker room for the Seahawks.
Yeah, you make a great point there, Liam, in the development. And that's kind of something I envision with him as well, being in the Seattle Seahawks team. They do a good job, again, of player development. They're, again, one of none of these other teams. Surprise, surprise, the teams that are really good know how to develop their players. So I think that's going to be, again, a great addition to their defense. But there are a couple players that, again, both of us left off. We had some switches. We had a lot of differences. But overall, Liam, I think it was a super fun mock draft.
Yeah, me too. This was a lot of fun. This draft is so much fun this year. A lot of people trash on this draft class for not having all that much talent, but I love this type of draft. There's a lot of teams with a lot of needs in the NFL this year, and there's a lot of players who otherwise in most other draft classes wouldn't necessarily get the chance to shine in these starting roles because there'd be a lot of guys who jump off the screen a little bit more as NFL ready players. So this is going to create a ton of opportunities for guys that come from unlikely schools, weren't necessarily standouts in college, to come up to the next level and really make a name for themselves. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I think this draft's going to be all over the place when we actually get to the draft. But yeah, just great to do this with you. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, sir.
Folks, let us know down below if there's anything about Leo's mock draft that you liked. What would you change? Let us know down below. But yeah, other than that, thank you for watching.